Okay. All right. Well, be mindful for her, that's for sure. If you would, open up to Deuteronomy chapter 23. Deuteronomy chapter 23. I hope you understand why I do this. A lot of times whenever we're studying a book, I'll start somewhere else. It just keeps us from going to that book, turning away, and then coming back. So, Deuteronomy 23. As we've continued to go through and talk about the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1, last week we talked about the promises that God gave to Abraham about a descendant, that all the nations would be blessed through him. We saw the promises to David about there's going to be one who comes to sit on your throne who will sit there forever, and my covenant with David will not be changed unless you can change the covenant that I have with day and night to alter their course, which of course man has no control over whatsoever. And also to take time and look through the story of Tamar as part of the lineage of Jesus. And then even last week also to talk about the story of Rahab and to see how God used these situations, even within the lineage of Jesus, to teach lessons of so many wonderful things about faithfulness to God, what happens when there's not faithfulness, like with the sons of Judah, to see even in terms of Rahab, that faith can come from even a foreigner. I mean, the faith that Rahab had in Israel was far more than 10 of the spies who went to spy out the land initially. And you realize what great emphasis to be able to be shown, especially in terms of, I think of Jesus as a young man or a young boy, and learning these family stories that we look back on and to go, what an encouragement in a lot of different ways. And things that typically, like lineage stories, and maybe you've gotten cornered by somebody over time and they want to tell you about some relative that's long, long, long ago, and you go, I don't know why they're telling me this. But typically, even in our own heritage, there's stories we know about our own people, but they're not necessarily stories we tell to everybody else. And so for Jesus to see these things, and of course, knowing full well that whenever Rahab and Salmon marry, that they give birth to the son whose name is Boaz. And so Boaz comes with an experience that not very many people did. In terms of Boaz going, my father is a Jew, my mother is from Jericho, a Canaanite woman. And so already kind of to be what some people would say a diversity of race or nationality, probably the better word, with this. And so that whenever Boaz comes and he sees Ruth the Moabitess show up, he already has a heart that's ready in terms of, take her into my house. I've been in a household like this already, and to be able to step in. But here's what I want you to take note of here in Deuteronomy chapter 23. Look at verses 2 and 3. 2 and 3, Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 2 and 3. He says, no one of illegitimate birth shall enter the assembly of the Lord, none of his descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall enter the assembly of the Lord. Now, we look at this, and of course, this is Old Covenant, but what do you see God is trying to protect? What did he want to really protect just in that one command? What do you see? Lineage, what? Yeah, bloodline. You think in terms of the aspects also, even alongside of that, of going, do you see how much he wanted marriage to be esteemed? He says, no one of illegitimate birth shall enter the assembly of the Lord, none of his descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall enter the assembly of the Lord. Then comes verse 3. No Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord, none of their descendant, even to the 10th generation, shall ever enter the assembly of the Lord. No Ammonite, you might go, well, okay, what's the big deal there? But then we go, Moabite, and we go, hold on here. Now we got something to talk about. With Ruth being a Moabite, you go, not even to the 10th generation? I mean, you look at that and you go, what does that really say about Ruth, the Moabitess? Well, look back over at, or look at Matthew chapter 1. And I want you to take note. And I want you to kind of count them up with me. Starting in verse 2, I want you to count the generations, beginning with Abraham. Matthew chapter 1, verse 2. You have Abraham, the father of Isaac, Isaac, the father of Jacob, Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez was the father of Hebron, or Hezor, and Hezor the father of Ram, and Ram was the father of Abinadab, and Abinadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz. See how many generations we got? What a coincidence, isn't it? No, it was planned out all the way back there from Deuteronomy, wasn't it? And so whenever God has Moses write down the book of Deuteronomy, which is basically just a month or two before they go in to take the promised land. Of course, Moses is going to die before that, but to go, not till the 10th generation, and to go, whenever Boaz comes around and he's going to marry Ruth, it's going to be the 11th generation. And you go, right on time. Which should tell us something, once again, about the wisdom and foreknowledge of God. To make a command way back in Deuteronomy before they even enter into the promised land concerning something that's not even going to really come into play for hundreds and hundreds of years. If this isn't an encouragement to us, whenever you see the commands of God, to go, He's already thought about the scenarios. Our role as servants of God is to honor them. And He has made them to run out at the right time. He has made them to begin at the right time. And everything has already been planned. The only question is, are we going to hold to what He desires? And so you just imagine for anybody who was reading that in the days of Boaz and to marry Ruth, a Moabitess nonetheless, to go, well, I thought we weren't supposed to marry any Moabite women. And you go, well, let's look at the commandment. Well, it says not till the 10th generation. Well, I wonder how many generations it's been. Oh! And you realize just the wonderful things that come together. And so just another kind of reiteration of those things. Now, I want you to look back at the book of Ruth real quickly. So Joshua judges Ruth. Ruth chapter 1. We're just going to read a few verses here in chapter 1 and then go over to chapter 4. And I think I want to say we're probably really familiar with the story of Ruth. Maybe that's an exaggeration for some, but to notice here and to see the heart of Ruth in this. Verse 14, he says, and they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And of course, here's Naomi saying, look, girls, I don't have anything for you. Y'all can just go on back home. And even in what she's going through, it's like, even if I was to have a husband today and to have a child, are you going to wait for him to grow up? I mean, are you going to wait 20 years? And so you can kind of see within Naomi the desperation of widowhood, of thinking, what can God do with me now? It's almost like she's looking at herself and going, even later on she has the name changed, says, just call me Mara, call me bitter. Look at how the Lord's dealt with me. And to think, if she could only see what God sees, what God has in store for her. And yet so many times, because faith is dead, we just can't see what God's trying to do. Notice verse 15. Then she said, behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. It's like, Orpah's already left. Just follow her lead and go back home. Go back to your own Moabite gods. Then, verse 16. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you, for where you go I will go, and where you lodge I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. And that's not the end of her statement, because verse 17 says, where you die I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. She says, mother-in-law, I'm with you till the end. You're not going to get rid of me. Now, you think about the urging that, even from Naomi's point of view, go back to your own gods. And yet you see Ruth say, no. I'm with your God. He says, I'm going to serve your God. And of course, this idea, he says, where you go, I'm going to go. Where you lodge, I'm going to lodge. We're going to live together. We're going to travel together. We're going to be together until the day we die. Oh, that kind of changes it. And there's something about how she said that. And you know those same kind of things when people talk to you and they say it in a certain way and you go, okay, this is non-negotiable. This is the way it's going to be. And if you notice at the end of, in verse 18, it says, when she saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. Like, okay, I guess that's the end of that. Let's just get going. So, but you notice he says, thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. And you think of that kind of conviction, and you can understand, think of what she's really saying. My commitment to you is till I die. It's not till you die. He says, it's until I die. Now, who do you hear echoes of that are going forward in that? Don't you hear Jesus in there? He says, I'm going to serve you until I die, God. He says, I'm not giving up any earlier. Now, you understand, these are things that are in place long before Jesus. And yet to go, here's what he has to look back on, and to think of having someone like that in your family, especially knowing it's a very pivotal moment. But by the time Jesus comes, all these details have already been lived and completed. And going, wow. Just because of one woman's conviction, who's not even a Jew. And it just so happens that this would come in the 11th generation of the Moabites. And you go, wow, look at what God's doing here. Now, look over at Ruth chapter 4. After the story is turned out well, and Boaz and Ruth are now married, and here Ruth is with child. Look down at verse 9. Wow, time's going to get away from us. Cover too much here. Look at verse 9. It says, then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses today that I have brought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. It says, moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess. And notice how out of its way it goes to tell you Ruth the Moabitess. It wants you to know that detail. Like, don't forget this. She is not a Jew, and she is mine. Then he says, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance, so that the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his brothers or from the court of his birthplace. You are witnesses today. And then notice what gets brought in verse 11. All the people who were in the court and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah. Now, think about Rachel and Leah from the 12 tribes, and think about between Rachel and Leah and their handmaids, there were 12 sons and one daughter. At least it's named. Maybe there were more. But looking at that and going, may your household be like the household of Jacob. How's that for a blessing? Now, it depends on how much you care about pregnancy. But you look through this and go, I mean, this is offered in full faith and reassurance. And he says, both of whom built the house of Israel, and may you achieve wealth in Ephrath and become famous in Bethlehem. Now, you know what's coming. I mean, there's a little foreshadowing for us. And going, oh boy, if those people only knew what kind of blessing they were giving. Of course, with Jesus being born in Bethlehem. Verse 12. Moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Does this sound familiar? I mean, it's like, These are all those things of just going, this is hand in glove just to show how we're looking at the same things because of what we know about the lineage. He says, born to Judah through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman. Notice what they're already looking for. She's not even pregnant. They're not even officially married yet. And they're already talking about, man, look at what's going to come because of what you've done with this woman, this Moabitess nonetheless. And think about that blessing. A blessing like this on a foreigner? Now, because of a deep love. And so, as you start to see these things work together, I mean, what a blessing to be asked for by God. And yet, through all these things together, look at verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Notice who's in charge. The Lord. That's such an interesting phrase. The Lord enabled her to conceive. Now, he says, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today, and may his name become famous in Israel. Do you think Boaz's name is pretty famous in Israel? Yeah, it is. To give you a little thought later, whenever Solomon builds the temple, you know what one of the pillars out front of the temple is named? Boaz. So you think anybody forgot about Boaz? I mean, you look, they're asking God to bless. What do you see God doing? Giving a blessing that's greater than what they could have even imagined. Now, anyway, let's keep going. Verse 15, may he also be to you a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons has given birth to him. He says, he's better than Mahlon and Chilion times 3.5, which that's not exactly what they meant, but you just kind of get the idea. Verse 16, then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. I mean, you talk about, it's like a grandmother who takes care of their grandchild every day. I mean, you realize there's a blessing that goes with that. And so then, verse 17, and this is a curious one to me. The neighbor women gave him a name. How many of you let your neighbors name your child? Especially with the names nowadays, no way. He says, a son has been born to Naomi, so they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. And you realize, here we're talking about the grandfather and great-grandfather of David. And you start to put those pieces together and realize, how come the book of Ruth has been written? And you go, this is about the lineage of Jesus. This is about the lineage of the throne of David. This is about how God brought in a Moabite, a foreign woman. This is about, you know what? God can use you no matter what your background is as part of his will and his plan in an honorable way. And then, of course, the overall, you get back to the genealogy or the generations in 18. He says, now these are the generations of Perez. And remember, Perez, of course, being the son of Judah. And this is a giving again of the genealogy, which tells you whenever you get over to Matthew or Luke 3 and it gives the genealogy of going, it's spot on. It's the same thing. This has been written down a long time ago. And you see God going, let's just preserve this so that you know it, so that you understand this lineage. And so Perez was born Hezron, to Hezron was born Ram, to Ram Abinadab, and to Abinadab was born Nahshon, and Nahshon Salmon, who we know of. And to Salmon was born Boaz, and to Boaz Obed, and to Obed was born Jesse, and to Jesse David. Period. In the book. It's like, and now you know. So you see these things together. Now come back over to Matthew chapter 1. So when you think about how God used Tamar, how God used a prostitute by the name of Rahab who turned to faith, and once she learned about God, she gave up on all those wicked ways. God uses them to have a child. You have Boaz. Boaz is ready to invite a Moabitess to come and live in his own home and to be blessed. And through that relationship with Boaz and Ruth to then give birth to Obed, Jesse, and then David comes in as king. And that brings us to the next aspect. Look in Matthew chapter 1, look at verse 6. Jesse was the father of David the king. David was the father of Solomon by Bathsheba, who had been the wife of Uriah. Notice what it will not let you forget. She was the wife, and it is was, had been the wife of Uriah. He says, you need to know that this didn't happen because it was all righteous and good. Now, I've often wondered, and it is just a wonderment, so be careful with this. If David would have just been faithful and not committed adultery with Bathsheba, I mean, Uriah is fighting in these battles. At some point, I mean, Uriah is going to die at some point in life. You don't know age. Could this have happened in a way that would have been righteous? Where if Uriah is killed in battle, not without David's plan he did it, but just in a natural way, and then all of a sudden for David to look across and then to see her bathing on the roof and go, oh, that's Uriah's widow. That story takes a completely different turn, doesn't it? And it tells you, what if there'd have been righteous patience? What if there would have been, you know what, that's Uriah's wife, no way, I'm not going that direction. And you realize, yet here was one of those times where David did follow after his desire. He did commit adultery. He did lay out the plan for the murder of Uriah. For Jesus, what lesson can you learn from that? Right.
Because I'm pretty sure that when they reflected back on the harlots, the whole situation with Tamar and all of that, and looking at that, you saw so much of that purity.
Right. And for that purity, not to be there in one sense, but yet here's God working things through. And I think about it in terms of with Jesus of going, it's not worth the sin. We know that Jesus lives a perfect life. But how many of these stories show you, did sin ever help God to achieve his real purpose? No. And so for Jesus to go, here's another example of going, it can be done in the right way and turn out better. Angie?
Some of that has to do with the forgiveness that's given.
Oh, certainly.
The sins are committed, there's still a huge forgiveness.
Right.
Somebody has to ask for it.
And you think in terms of people asking for forgiveness and think, here's Jesus. I mean, just the name Jesus is about Savior. And to go, here I am. And to go, I have to give my life for the sins of everyone. And that even includes my own family. Now, you start to pull these loose ends together and you see what God's doing and achieving. And so you see Bathsheba, who, of course, once and Nathan specifically tells David, you've been forgiven by God. Which, to me, that's an awesome thought of being specifically told that you're forgiven. But then the question comes down to, am I going to be faithful to believe what Nathan told me? Because that puts it kind of in the same spot where we are. Here's Jesus saying, I died for your sins, and you have been born again, baptized and raised up with me. Your sins have all been washed away by the blood of Christ. And to go, that's what God said, but the question is, do I believe what he said? It comes down to that same thought, doesn't it? Am I going to believe what he told me? Now, you notice all these things together. With Bathsheba, of course, things change. And here's where kind of a unique moment takes place. If you're to compare the genealogy here in Matthew chapter 1 with the one that's over in Luke chapter 3, they don't read the exact same. Now, if you go down through and take the time to comprise them, you realize it starts off with Abraham. In Luke, it starts with Adam to get down to Abraham. It was Abraham, work your way down, you get to Isaac, Jacob, you get down to Judah, you get down to, of course, coming through Salmon, and you get Boaz, and you come down. And as you get down to this point where you come to David, at this point, the two genealogies, like they've come down together, and then all of a sudden you get to this point here with David, then they break off. One of the genealogies goes with Solomon, and the other genealogy goes through Solomon's brother, Nathan. And you realize, whoa, he's working these things together. And what you realize is one of the genealogies is about Joseph, and the other genealogy is really about Mary. But he's showing them together. And so they come down and they break off here, and then they're going to come back together again at one point later on in this thing, which is really neat. And then it's going to separate and divide back out again. And then it comes down to Joseph and Mary. And so we could spend way more time on this, but we're not going to. But I want to show you where they converge again to come back together. Notice how we go through these next few verses. Verse 7. Solomon was the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Asa. Rehoboam, if you remember, whenever Rehoboam and Jeroboam, that's whenever the kingdoms get divided. Rehoboam gets Judah and Benjamin. Jeroboam gets the other 10 tribes. And then all of a sudden you have Israel and Judah. And they start to flow down through. There are no good kings of Israel after that break. It's the easiest question on a Trivial Pursuit answer. If they're a king of Judah after Solomon, they're all evil and wicked. It's just an easy answer. If you go down through Judah, you kind of get a spattering. There's some good ones, there's some ugly ones, there's some evil ones, all kinds of things. But I want you to notice through these verses, in verse 8, I'm going to point out which ones are good kings, according to the Old Testament. Verse 8, Asa, good king, was the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat, a good king. The father of Joram. Joram was a good king too. He says, the father of Uzziah. Uzziah was the father of Jotham. Jotham, the father of Ahaz. Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah is a wonderful king. Then he says, Hezekiah was the father of Manasseh. Manasseh is kind of a 50-50 split on good and evil. He started off evil, ended up good. Manasseh, the father of Ammon, and Ammon, the father of Josiah. Josiah is unbelievably good. Then it says, Josiah became the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. For Jesus to look back through this, to get 5 wonderful kings, also David and Solomon, what do you think that's training Jesus to think about? If you think back through the history of Judah, kings can either be fantastic and great, or they can be rotten and evil. And of course, Jesus is going to live his life. It's all about justice and righteousness. He's going to do things in a way that are holy, truth, those kind of things. Verse 12. After the deportation to Babylon, in other words, all right, this is the people of Judah being taken into captivity into Babylon. This is where the books like of Daniel, the book of Esther, these are where those time frames fit in history. So, after the deportation of Babylon, Jeconiah became the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel. Now, I don't know how much time you've spent looking at Shealtiel and Zerubbabel, but it's a fun dive, let me tell you. We're just going to touch the hem of the garment here for about 5 minutes, unless my mouth gets carried away. But I want you to notice this, and I want you to remember those 2 men, father, son, Shealtiel, who is the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel, who's the son of Shealtiel. They are both priests. Now, pick up on that. Remember who this lineage is through? Judah. But these guys are priests. Now, come back to the book of Ezra real quick. I want to go through this just real fast. Ezra chapter 3. Ezra is actually a priest himself and a scribe. He's not the high priest, but he's a priest. Ezra chapter 3, look at the first couple of verses. They give you some time frame, and then specifically verse 2 is what we need. Ezra chapter 3, verse 1. Now when the 7th month came, and this is the 7th month, they're talking about, this is after they came back from Babylon. They've come back. They've been sent back, actually. He says, and the sons of Israel were in the cities. The people gathered together as one man to Jerusalem. So everybody now that they've come back has come back to Jerusalem. Don't think about it being a whole lot of people. I mean, we're talking 10,000 people. There's not a whole lot of Jews that came back at this point. Yet the number does get bigger. If you look at the whole assemblies, it actually gets up to like 42,000 something. But then here, verse 2. Then Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, and his brothers the priests, and Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel. He says, and his brothers arose and built the altar of the God of Israel to offer burnt offerings on it, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. Now, this is Shealtiel and Zerubbabel, and they are part of this initial group that starts what to happen again? They build the altar. I mean, remember, this is the temple that Solomon built has been utterly destroyed. I mean, completely destroyed. Like 150 years before, maybe 70 years before. It's actually less than that. But whenever you look through it and go, now the people have come back, and somebody has to start them on the path. Now notice, how long have they been there? It's the 7th month, right? So they've been back around for a little while, but then Shealtiel and Zerubbabel, priests, they come in and they go, you know what? We have got to resume and begin again worshiping God in this city. And so they build an altar. Now, don't think about this as being extravagant, but they build an altar, and the whole purpose is to offer up burnt offerings. Now, in the verses that come down through here, it's going to go on. The burnt offering was offered every morning and every evening. It showed a conviction toward God, a dedication toward God, that we will always remember you. A burnt offering said to God, God, I give you all of me. This was the way that Israel showed they were giving themselves completely to God. We will honor you every day, and not just once. We will offer this up in the morning and in the evening. And as you would see the smoke of that offering go up, you would know we still have a relationship with God, our God. Now, here they were coming back after being utterly destroyed. And so here they return. Look a little bit further down. Look at verse 8. Same chapter, Ezra 3, verse 8. He says, now in the 2nd year of their coming to the house of God at Jerusalem, in the 2nd month. So 2nd year, 2nd month, they've been there for a while. He says, Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel. He shows up again. He says, and Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, and the rest of their brothers, the priests and the Levites, and all who came from the captivity to Jerusalem, began the work and appointed the Levites from 20 years and older to oversee the work of the house of the Lord. So what are they about to do? He says, now it's not just about an altar to offer a burnt offering. Now it's time to rebuild the temple. Now, there's a prophet that serves in those days whose name you know. His name is Haggai. Now, I want you to notice here, this is the 2nd year and the 2nd month. Look over at the book of the prophet Haggai. If you can find little old Haggai, in the very first chapter, it's in the Minor Prophets. Haggai, chapter 1. And I'll see if I can find it too. Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai. Haggai chapter 1, just look at the first verse. Haggai chapter 1, verse 1. If you can't find it, you can just listen. In the 2nd year of Darius the king, on the 1st day of the 6th month. Now, think about timing. Here they were going to start in the second year, second month. Now here we are, the second year and the 6th month. He says, the word of the Lord came by the prophet Haggai to who? Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and what's his job? The governor. He's the governor of Judah. Oh, you mean there's people in this lineage who have been governors as well as kings? It's there. He says, and to Joshua the son of Jehozadak the high priest, saying, and he's about to tell him, here you've come back and you've built your own paneled houses and you have not rebuilt the temple. Your priorities are out of whack and you're paying for it. And he talks about it later on down in verses, the first 7 verses here, about you wonder why you farm but you don't have enough to eat. You wonder why you can't have enough rain to grow. You wonder why you have a pocket but you got a hole in the bottom of it, is the way we would say it, of going, look at all these things together. Only thing I really want to point out, I want you to notice Zerubbabel and Shealtiel. They're names that probably, if they were told to you at the beginning of class, you'd have said, who are these guys? But you realize these are part of the people who are in the lineage of Jesus. Now, come back over to Matthew chapter 1. So whenever it makes this statement, here in verse 12, remember, who is the Gospel of Matthew written to? It's written to the Jews. These are names that the Jews are going to go, oh, I know that name. I know that name. I know that name. Oh, I remember how instrumental Shealtiel and Zerubbabel were in basically a restoration of God's people back in Jerusalem after we had been taken captive because of our evil. And you go, oh, wow. Now, I want you to think for a moment. For Jesus, if we can kind of try to put our feet in his shoes, what does Israel need when Jesus shows up? Doesn't Israel need a restoration? Don't they need a movement back to God because they've been away? Don't they need someone like Shealtiel and Zerubbabel to come and say, you know what, it's time to worship God the way he says to worship him. It's time to rebuild an altar. It's time to rebuild the temple. I mean, you think about John chapter 2 with Jesus. What is he so disgusted about? He says, take these things away. You're turning my Father's house into a place of business. He says, you have degraded my Father's house. And I wonder if he had learned about Shealtiel and Zerubbabel. To go, I know this is what we need to do. Then, like I said, I don't know that. I'm just putting some pieces here in front. Verse 12 says, after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah became the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was the father of Abihud, and Abihud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor. And you really start getting into names here that are bridging that 400-year gap between Malachi and Matthew, or Jesus, however you want to say it. Verse 14, Azar was the father of Zadok, Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Elihud. Just for clarity, I know it says Zadok here. That is not the same Zadok that you probably know something about. Whenever Solomon was king and David was king, there was a priest by the name of Zadok, not one and the same. It won't work. They're so many hundreds of years apart, there's no way they can be the same person. He says, the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Elihud, verse 15. Elihud was the father of Eleazar, Eleazar the father of Mathan, and Mathan the father of Jacob. Now, just to kind of stop there for a second, I'm going to ask you a question that you're not asking me. I want you to think about this, because you're aware of these things, but to kind of make sure you got the pieces together. Typically, whenever you think about Jesus, he has a relative who goes around as a forerunner whose name is John the Baptist. John the Baptist's father's name is what? Do you remember? Zechariah. What is Zechariah doing whenever he's told that he's going to have a child? He had gone in to offer the incense at the hour of prayer, which is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And if you remember, Zechariah is a Levite priest. Now, I don't know if you've ever wondered this question. How can Jesus be related of the tribe of Judah to another man who's a Levitical priest? Because John the Baptist would have been a son of a Levitical priest, so that would have made him a Levitical priest of the tribe of Levi. If you've ever wondered, how can a man who's from the tribe of Judah be related to a man who's of the tribe of Levi? They're related. If you remember, Gabriel says, your relative, Elizabeth, is with child, even in her old age. And you go, okay, here's a relationship. Now, do you remember about Shealtiel and Zerubbabel? What are they? They're priests. So they're the tribe of Levi. And you realize part of that family heritage comes around, and it comes down not only to Jesus in the tribe of Judah, but also to John the Baptist, so that they're relatives. Now, maybe I'm getting off into the weeds here. But I just want you to see, Scripture backs up all these things that we look at and sometimes we don't even consider. Because we think about Jesus being a priest, but he's of the tribe of Judah. But Jesus has a little bit of Levite in him. He's not a purebred Judah. And so you come to understand, aha, no wonder he can serve as a priest in the true tabernacle in heaven. Levite and Judah. Just like I said, I know you're not asking that question, but I just want you to know there's so many things through here that tie together, and just to take the time to enjoy them every once in a while. And so when you see what's at hand here, you realize, I told you about the lineage, from Adam all the way down till you get to David and Solomon. At David, all of a sudden, the two lineages from Luke 3 and Matthew 1, they start to deviate. It says, because one uses David's son Solomon, one uses David's son Nathan. Different than Nathan the prophet, by the way. And all of a sudden, they go down and around, and then they come back together at Shealtiel and Zerubbabel, whenever they come back from captivity. And then from there, they divide out again. And that's how you get John the Baptist, and that's how you get Jesus. But you also notice, you also get a relative with Mary and Elizabeth to where they come together. See, I'm probably not doing a good job of explaining this. But to come together and to see these things at hand, look at verse 16. It says, Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, by whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah, or the Christ. And you realize, who has this been about all along? Remember how we started in verse 1 and 2? He says, the record of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah. He says, that's how this book opens. I'm telling you the story of the Messiah. Perk your ears up. And then he goes, starts working his way down through here. And something else maybe to remember. If you remember, Paul wrote to Timothy in chapter 1, and he told him in verses 3 and 4, he's like, don't pay attention to endless genealogies. So you know we could spend a whole lot more time here. I think we've gleaned what we need. There's some other things here, but to understand that these things together, I think of sometimes some trivia type questions, like who's Jesus' mother and father? And people typically say Joseph and Mary. You ever been asked the question, who are Jesus' grandparents? And yet you can answer the questions. One of them is Jacob, and the other one actually is Heli, H-E-L-I, or Eli from over in Luke 3. But notice it here. It says, Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, by whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah. Then you come to verse 17. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the deportation to Babylon to, do you see how the emphasis comes in again? The Messiah. It doesn't just go say, and to Jesus. It wants you to know something more. We're dealing in terms of the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one. And to bring it together and go to the Messiah, 14 generations. So you can do your math pretty quick. From Abraham down to the Messiah is 42 generations. You think, matter of fact, 42 generations. And by the way, from Adam to Abraham is 21 generations. So you go from Adam, the Son of God, which is the way he's talked about at the very last verse of Luke chapter 3, down to Jesus, the Son of God, in a different way. 63 generations. And to go, and you can account for every one of them, all the way down through. No skipping. Now, as you see this picture, did they care about the genealogy? Yeah. Specifically to the Jews. Right.
But I have a question. So it always goes by the male and what tribe they were from.
Right.
But as we see with Mary and Elizabeth, they didn't always have to marry within them.
Correct. Correct.
That makes a whole different gamut. I mean,
Right.
Jews,
Sure.
but not particularly within their tribe.
So what Carla's really saying is women have always been the wild card. Just so you know. No, no. I know that's not what she was saying. But,
It meant a lot to the Jews to
right.
this day. I mean, thank you
Sure.
for that.
I mean, it meant everything to them.
It did. But it's interesting that when we look at the other gospels, we don't see it that way.
Right, for sure. And you think, even though Luke's written to the Gentiles, of going, he goes ahead and lines it out so that if they would ever get asked a question about, well, you know, I thought he's supposed to be related to David or to Abraham or to Judah or all these different things, and going, okay, they got enough to know. But at the same time, you look through here, and you just see it over and over and over again. And you think here, in terms of with Jesus, how many lessons was there for Jesus to hear as a young boy, just in hearing stories about his own specific bloodline family? And you go, how many countless illustrations of things could he learn? Whether it be about faithful women, whether it be about women who had changes of heart, who are running away from God rather than toward God, to think in terms of kings, whether they were good, bad, or evil, to think in terms of how God could use other people to bring about what he desired to happen, for God's people to be carried off into captivity and to be brought back. And at the same time, everything really circling around the Messiah and going, the anointed one. And as we've talked about last week, anointed with the Spirit of God whenever he's baptized, anointed with sin when he dies, and anointed with life when he raises again. And you think, anointed as king in terms of anointed with blood in his death, and yet at the same time, anointed as king whenever he ascends to the right hand of God. And you think about all these things have to deal with anointing. They're all about Messiah prophecies. They're all about these things that were given in place. And to go, here's Matthew's introduction. Matthew the tax collector, the one that people would look down on because of his job. And yet he follows Jesus. And he says, and I want to put these things in front of you so that you don't stumble, because there is going to be some interesting things that happen later on where they go, well, I thought the Messiah, Jesus, born in Bethlehem, raised in Nazareth, a Gentile, the Yankees, if you want to think about it that way, and going, they even spoke different dialect. And so whenever Jesus shows up, they're like, this doesn't make sense. he's supposed to be born of Bethlehem, but he talks like a Yankee. How does that fit? And then you get what's coming at the end of Matthew 1 and all of chapter 2, to iron out all those things that people just didn't take time to investigate. They were writing off Jesus because they just didn't look into things. Now, there's some things coming up through the end of Matthew chapter 1 and Matthew chapter 2 that I'm pretty sure to some of us, we've been told things for so many years around the holiday times in December that there's some things in here that are going to just completely uproot some of those things. And so go ahead and be reading through the end of chapter 1 and chapter 2 to get ready for next week. And we're going to take those things, and I think you'll find plenty of things to really, really enjoy about what we get to go through. Any questions before we end? All right. Have a good rest of the week.